Hello, and welcome to our latest video as part of the St. Bart's project. Today we'll be looking at Dark St. Bart's, looking at all the ghost stories associated with it, as well as the Loch Hospital era, which was very relevant to the hospital at the time. So yeah, without further ado, I'll hand over to Natasha to take us through Loch Hospital, what it's all about, and how is it relevant to St. Bart's in Rochester.
Yeah, so we're going to be moving over from our medieval period that we've been talking about over the last few days and moving into more modern times. And the hospital generally, if you were going to start thinking about building a hospital, you're going to want to have some plans about what that hospital is going to provide to the local community. And therefore, the trustees, they actually reformed the board of trustees in 1858 after it had kind of been really broken down for some time, and the hospital as such was really quite unfunctional. There'd been minimal people being supported through it, and so they reconstituted it as a charity, and they appealed to the government that one of the biggest needs in the community was to be able to support women that were suffering with sexual health diseases. And so they proposed that they should have a ward of 30 beds to support women in the local area. And it was indeed a need. And so when the hospital was built, that was basically what went ahead. They got the approval that that was the main need in the area. Now, what's quite interesting, though, is that the time between when they decided that that would be a good idea and the time the hospital wards actually opened, the Contagious Diseases Act came in. But when they originally had planned to have these women come in, it would have been voluntary. So what would have happened was the police would have gone up to the working girls and kind of said, you really should be having regular checkups. Do you agree to do this? It's voluntary. And they would be like, okay, yeah, that's fine. And they would just they'd agree to do it for 12 months. If they disagreed, that would be a bit different, and they would be then kind of taken to court over it and told you've got to go and have these checkups. But otherwise, it was kind of more like a clinic base. But when the Contagious Diseases Act came in, they were forced to have to go to these wards. And this is where it became really controversial, because they were not allowed to leave until it was seen that they were clear of disease. So in October 1863, the women started to arrive into the Loch Wing, which was at the west end of the building and consisted of 4 wards in total, 2 of which were very small ones and only had about 3 beds in each of them. The women were clearly segregated because it was only the high officers that were allowed to have keys. So no one else could even have keys. If you dread to think in an emergency.
Yeah.
And the trustees had written to Portsmouth, who also had Loch wards, and they had said, we'd really like some advice on how to run things. The interesting thing is 10 years later, when somebody went to go and check them and check that everything was in line with the Contagious Diseases Act, they were found to be completely unfit, one of the worst in the country. So St. Bart's had a really bad leading example, actually, for setting up these wards. It really wasn't good. But yeah, so they admitted women there for 7 years, but it was so much more difficult than what they had imagined. I found it, 1864 is when the Contagious Diseases Act came in, and the ward had opened in 1863. So this was a really short period of time. The trustees couldn't have known this was going to happen. So they went from being kind of more of a clinic base, doing treatments on a day-to-day basis, to being essentially a type of hostel stroke prison for women that had to stay until their treatments were finished. And this meant that these women started to become quite aggressive, understandably. Now, I went down this whole rabbit hole as to kind of why they were being so aggressive, and I assumed it was because they were being kept in, or that the treatments were really horrible. But what was interesting is, by the point that this Loch ward was open, because I always assumed that they were still doing all these really horrible mercury treatments, because prior to the 1860s, they were still like giving women mercury to drink, bathing them in it, and so it was slowly killing them. And it had become obvious that this was making it worse. So by this point that the ward was open at St Bart's, that type of treatment had finished. So they were looking at other types of solutions. So mainly it was bathing in types of different lotions, being very clean. So it was all about interesting to do with cleanliness. This takes us back to the word lock and why it was called a lock ward, which I thought it was literally because they're locked in, and it kind of is, because it connects back to leprosy, weirdly, because when with the lepers, obviously, we mentioned it the other day, in biblical times they were seen as, they're outcasts, weren't they, from the community, and they would be completely sectioned, and so it's believed that this word lock was either connected to a leper house where somebody was segregated, and that word lock, confined lock, so you can see where all this word originates from, or maybe the word in French for lock, so with a Q, which was a type of rag or bandage that was applied to people with leprosy. So either way, it was to do with skin conditions again. And the main skin conditions that women were suffering from in England was syphilis, which turned into terrible ulcerations of the skin. So it's so interesting that the original hospital was for leprosy, for treating skin conditions, and actually the main issue with the sexual health at the time was syphilis, which was also a terrible skin conditions. These again were ulcers that would kind of eat away your eyes, your nose, your lips. It was just awful. So
you
like
wouldn't want to have it, sure. No.
And you could die from it because it could go into your mouth and your throat. So it'd be a horrible way to die. And so they were using lotions and things like that to be able to treat it. And so it wasn't so much the actual treatments that the women were getting angry about. What had happened is, and I've still got to unpick this more, and if anyone has any information, I'd be very interested, but their approach to dermatology at this time, having seen that mercury was a complete fail, was to restrict the diet. So I can only presume that they maybe had found that there was either anti-inflammatory kind of reaction to restricting the diet, which could be, well, I thought, or maybe it was more of a keto diet, but looking at what they were fed, it still included bread and broth, so there were still carbohydrates. So my second thought is probably that the restricted diet was more about kind of avoiding allergies without them even realizing that that's what they were doing. So you know how now you exclude dairy and chocolate for things like that. I think that they were starting to realize that there was a dietary reaction within the skin to different foods, and so they were restricting the diet. So this restricted diet would generally be three servings of soup a day, and then broth, and then a roll. Looking into a diet that is like that, if you've come from eating normal food, that would essentially drive you a bit nuts, because you are being so you're kind of, imagine you go to bed and you've had a bread roll, and then the whole day you're on your mainly fluids and vegetables. So your body's going to start thinking, okay, I need to start breaking down some muscle or something in the body to kind of create energy. And then you have a bread roll again. So it's continually tricking your mind into thinking that you're starving, and you're going to start breaking down your body fat and your muscle, and then you're giving carbohydrates again. From what I could tell, this would absolutely drive somebody berserk and nuts. The women started to basically just grab chairs and start smashing windows, and it was because they felt that their skin had improved and it was time to go. And it got to the point where the women were so angry and so hungry, they were starting to rally up other people. And one woman, she actually creeped from one ward to another and managed to encourage, I think her name was that one Alice Waite? There was a lady who, yeah, she crawled from one ward to another, got another gang of 6 women together, and they all just went for it. And over the total 7 years of it being a lock ward, 40 windows were smashed. A prayer book was also destroyed, a Bible was destroyed, and a wash basin. Yeah, just completely.
It got
Yeah.
pretty manic in there.
Yeah.
From what I can tell, yeah.
They were pretty angry because, and their point of view, there was a solicitor for St. Bart's. So there was a dedicated solicitor. I think his name was Hayward. And he was just confused because he was like, you've got games on the ward? Like, apparently they had dominoes and drafts, and they were starting to create an outdoor recreation area. So to him, in his mind, he was like, I don't understand. But I think
don't understand their problems,
I think they were going crazy from starving, and they said they would rather be in Maidstone prison in the jail than be in there and starve. So they really felt they would be fed better in prison.
Yeah.
So
it goes to show how bad the experience was.
Yeah, and it was very clear there was no records at all of it being the treatments. By the way, this is all from the Chatham Scandal book, and then doing research based on what came out of the amazing Chatham Scandal book, which I highly recommend if you want to know more for anybody. And then I had to go away and be like, what is this about this restricted diet? What was making them so angry? Because obviously if you're being fed quite well, you wouldn't maybe feel like that, apart from wanting to get back to normal everyday life, as we now know. But you know, the good food often kind of helps us feel a bit better about that situation. And they said that they felt like they would be less starved in prison, so they were quite willing to smash things up. And then that kind of would end up being the case, is that the solicitor would often actually want there to be quite heavy treatment, because they would heavy kind of reaction to their behavior, because he was kind of like, you're just smashing up our hospital. But the judge seemed like they were quite compassionate, because he was like, I just want you to realize that you're damaging something that is supposed to prevent women from having a really horrible death. So it was like the intention was there, but they just didn't understand treatment wise what was happening to this woman with the restricted diet. And I just find that really interesting, and I kind of want to learn more about that. The recreation ground. So this recreation ground started to kind of be created, and I've got to still try and work out where exactly it was. But when they first proposed it, it was basically like, there's no way. It was a bit of, again, a scandal, because they were like, well, you can't have the general public walking past because of where it is and then talking to all the working girls. Can you imagine? It would be really controversial. Be like, oi, like, all right, Suze. So they said that the only way that would be possible was if it had like fences and walls around it. So that's what they done, and then they created an outdoor area for the women to spend their time in. But I've got to work out exactly, because I don't really understand what is the west wing of the hospital yet, and whether it doesn't mean that is either where
it would be interesting to look at historical maps and compare the modern maps from today and see the outlines of potentially where that recreation ground was.
Trying to work out, because I think it probably would be on the west wing side of the hospital, because they wouldn't let the women go anywhere near the rest of the wards. They had to stay in the wards. So I think it'd be big interesting to see where that was. And again, like, wonder whether that was actually quite different to maybe what other hospitals were doing at the time, to have an outdoor area. But it's interesting. It changed my perception of it, because the treatments weren't as bad as I thought they were at this point that ward opened. And also they were just being guided by what was considered the best treatment at the time. They didn't know any different, and they thought that was helping the skin and preventing those women from dying. Ultimately, though, of course, the men weren't being treated. So that's another thing, is that often when the trustees wrote to the government to say, can you fund us for these wards, their kind of angle would be, you know, because we need to make sure the men maintain health to be in their service. So it was all about making sure that the men could still go out to war and that they didn't catch syphilis, rather than making sure that also they were treated. Of course, the men did end up being treated when it got really bad, because it was a horrible death.
I think it's definitely fair to say, medicine and healthcare as a whole really developed over the years, especially since the Loch era. It really has come a long way, and especially now, obviously we're in a pandemic, we're seeing how, even now we've seen a lot of innovation come about, and maybe St. Bart's feels around. It could have been maybe at the forefront of more innovation potentially.
Well, that's where it becomes really interesting, actually, because that hospital closed, or they closed their wards in around 1870, March 1870. The women was started to be transferred to the dedicated Loch Hospital on Maidstone Road, which was just a Loch Hospital. So they were able to reclaim their wards, and they'd kind of said, surely it'd be better now for us to serve the dockyard and the injuries that were coming out of things like ironwork, because apparently men were starting to get a lot of eye injuries, and they said, we are supposed to serve our community, and this is where a lot of the injuries are coming from. So that's then what happened, which makes sense as to why we'll see later in the week there were eye wards there, because serving the dockyard. But bringing then it into more recent times, there was a sexual health clinic at St. Bart's Hospital around the back, and it was concentrated on outreach work. And I was speaking to Hilary Cook. She gave me she used to work there and help with some of this outreach work, along with Martin and Peter, and they would go out into the community. So they would go and give out contraception to local pubs and different community centres, and they would use the little building which just at the back of the hospital. It was really like a single story. It was probably purpose built for being like a clinic, but they would also hold meetings in the water tower / mortuary office upstairs, so they would have meetings in there. But what was interesting is that going back to the section 28 in law constituted that you couldn't support LGBT rights within sexual education, basically. And so they were quite crafty about it in Medway. They kind of found a way. It was like you couldn't promote being LGBT, and they found a way of being able to go out into schools, and then through the sexual education they were doing, they would talk about LGBT, and they were doing it in a really clever way that actually people in the rest of the country were hearing about it, and they were contacting Medway and saying, we want to know more about how you're doing this education pack, and we would like to do it ourselves. Wow. So Medway actually became leading. So it went from being so it actually did end up leading locally in the way it was doing this work.
Also, I just wanted to say I'm going through some of the comments now.
Oh wow.
Thank you for the people that are tuning in. There's one guy, he said that he did manage to get a copy of Chatham Scandal. It took him a while to source, but apparently it was a limited print. So
yeah, I managed to get a book. I think it just popped up. I must have had it on alerts or something, or I checked eBay at the right time, and it was like £12. I was like, yes. Yeah, it's a good book.
Very interesting by the sounds of it. Lots of information.
Very detailed, and you do end up with more questions. I was going yesterday. I was like, but why were they restricting their diet?
The next sort of section that we want to look at in today's session, as part of Dark St. Bart's, and we really wanted to look at something that was a hot topic, I suppose, ghosts at St. Bart's. That is something that people have been talking about for years. There's been all sorts of, even urban explorers, they've been going around saying they've seen stuff, and we have been able to collect some stories, some experiences, I think should be the better word to put it that way, some experiences of people seeing ghosts and other mysterious sort of figures. So I think Natasha has a few accounts that she will share first. and afterwards I'll be sharing a few of the experiences that you guys have been able to send to us over Facebook so far. And as well, if you've got any stories, more experiences, especially ghost stories, but anything else to do with St. Bart's, please do get in touch. You can get in touch with us via social media, through the Future Chatham page or Creatabot. You can also go through email, stbartsproject@gmail.com. We've received a few emails already, and we're really thankful for those that have. And also you could send it by post to Intra, which is along the old high street between Chatham and Rochester. The details are on the Future Chatham website, and we'll dish that out to you soon. So Natasha, do you want to take us through some of the spooky encounters of St. Bart's?
Yeah, that'd be great. One of the first stories that came up was through Rita Treves, and she worked there as a healthcare assistant. It would have been in more recent times, actually. So this would have been early noughties, as I like to say, I believe. So just before it was closed, really, in 2016. And also her husband would work there on agency shifts and always done nights. So there we go. He's the
We've
person
got
to know.
a perfect setting already. So.
Exactly. And so she said that she had a ghost lady on an evening shift. She says she walked past me in a bright red coat with a hood up into the side room. I thought, that's a bit odd, as the door buzzer hasn't gone, but I'll have to go and get her soon as it's coming up to mealtime. So she walked into the room, and there was nobody there, and the two patients there thought that she was a complete loon. I looked around the whole ward, but I knew she couldn't have gone past me, as the room was right behind where I was doing the drug round. So yeah, this ghost in the red cloak, I always think of the Handmaid's Tale in this description, like, yeah, sneak past her. And the fact that she thought, I must tell her to leave, that always makes me think that when someone has a reaction and they're kind of like, oh, I need to do something about that, that's the point where you're like, did I see something? Or if they feel like they had to do something, that's when I'm like, they definitely saw something. Her husband also, he had a nap on the physio table to have a sleep, but he woke up because someone was operating on his knee.
On his knee, let's say, but yeah.
So that's pretty weird. Also, a member of staff went to the toilet while all staff and the patients were in the dining room, and then they heard her shouting because she'd been locked in, because there was like a lock on the outside and she'd been locked into it, and there was no one else on the ward. So this girl got locked into the toilet from the outside without even, like, there was no one there to do it.
Yeah.
And she also comments that All Saints Hospital, which obviously a lot of services transferred over to, and I think she probably was in the middle of that all happening. She said it was just as bad. There would be breezes going across their legs under the desk. Yeah, and she said she saw somebody in the kitchen at All Saints when there was nobody there as well. So yeah,
some pretty mysterious first-hand experiences.
Yeah, exactly.
I think that's the thing with hospitals, they're the best sort of place for these sort of ghost stories, as well as abandoned buildings, but definitely hospitals it gets.
Exactly, yeah. So I've got another little I've got a little slideshow. Thank you very much to Kim from K Urban X for giving us these photos to use. So this is from one of her urban explores before the hospital was taken over by developers. And then there's an interview with Linda Pearson, who just talks a little bit about kind of the ghost stories she would hear in her time working there.
I mean, we used to sort of listen out. We heard all the stories about, you know, the woman that floated around and stuff. And Sheppey Tower was renowned for being the ghost ward, but I never encountered anything. There was the conference room. I think that was one of the places, and up the stairs to the conference room. That was a place as well.
So yeah, just a little video there. She she said that she didn't personally have any experiences of things that she'd seen, but it always seems to be that some people do and some people don't. Some people see everything and then some people see nothing. So I think you've got some stories as well, haven't you?
I do, yes. We've had quite a few stories from members of the public, and obviously it's something that for years people have been talking about. But we're really thankful for the people that recently shared directly with us some of their experiences about ghosts. So we've got one from Jean Harris on Facebook, and she mentions the Grey Lady who apparently visited the children of the children ward, Sponge.
Yeah, I think it's Spong, because there's no E on the end. Yeah, I don't know where that name comes from. I'd like to know, because a lot of the other wards have named after people, but Spong. Yeah.
So apparently this Grey Lady visited children in the children ward called Spong after each child dies. So when Jean was on night duty as a student nurse back in about 1968, she thinks she saw her. The staff nurse had left the ward to get her supper and had a 18-month child which had just died as a patient, and Jean was left with the body, and it seemed to get very cold, and all of a sudden a grey haze seemed to come to the ward. Is this what you were looking for?
It's never what we're looking for. We're not looking for it.
I wasn't looking for something spooky, is that?
Yeah. A grey haze.
That is really interesting. And it is interesting to find out more about the children ward and why it's called Spong, because there's been some people on Facebook who we were discussing about that. But yeah, they don't know why it's called Spong either.
Right, okay.
It'll be good to look into that.
Yeah. We're going to talk a little bit about more on the wards, aren't we, later in the week? So maybe we'll discover more by that point.
Yeah, I think
I'd like to lay it out. I'd love to do a picture of where the wards were, or ask people to help and kind of pin them.
Map.
Yeah, that'd be good.
Yeah. Also, we had another contribution from Sally. She said that she worked there in the theatres and that closed down. And when it closed down, they all had to go to Medway Hospital to work. She loved working there. She said that there were 2 theatres in the hospital, one on the first floor, one below that. She remembers the hospital, especially it being haunted. She said that you could go up to the spiral stairs up to the turret, and the mortuary was at the back in the white building. And she found it really sad on the day they all left. And I'm sure it was quite a sad day, because from what I've heard, the staff they felt like one big family, like a community. So I'm sure that they felt sad. But the haunted, I mean, to be fair, they maybe even missed the haunted bit for all we know. I think it's quite interesting on the job.
Definitely.
Yeah, we also had another contribution. I think this one was one of the creepiest, from Carol. She said that she used to work in the A&E department as a kid. Happy days. She did part of her nurse training there, and she saw the ghost of Bishop Gundulph himself while she was on night duty. And she said that she saw Bishop Gundulph on a couple of occasions when she was on night duty as a mature student nurse on the Gundulph ward. So there seems that there was a
fitting.
The first time she saw Gundulph, it was when he was sitting by the bed of an elderly man. I walked up to the ward and told him to tell him visiting was long over, but he vanished as I got to the bed. The same thing happened on a number of other nights, some couple of days later, but later during the night. And she was just watching him until he stood up and faded. And she described him as having long hair, but what seemed to me was some of the medical clothes that they had to wear, and the clerical clothes as well.
Right. Interesting. So he'd become an honorary member of the staff. He decided then, basically. Yeah, that's incredible, isn't it? I guess if you were a ghost, though, you would someone had named a ward after you and it was where you'd done a lot of work, then you probably would frequent it, I would say.
Yeah, I think you'd be quite proud. You'd want to come back to as much as possible. But I mean, that's something that people have been talking about. We've been discussing between us, myself and Natasha. We've been talking about the new residents that move into their apartments. How are they going to feel about all these ghost stories? If they dig deep enough into Google, I'm sure they're going to find some stories, and they'll be like, oh God, what did we get ourselves into?
I was saying, wasn't I, about, you know, making sure there's an extra bedroom.
Yeah, an extra visitor bedroom.
Ask people if,
ghosts.
if we know anybody that moves in there, we're going to ask them how many people live there, and then if they say, oh, just me, I'll be like, are you sure?
Are you sure? I think the ghost stories is definitely one of the key themes that underpins the hospital. It's something that's been going on for a while, clearly, and I think it's quite chilling to hear, you know, the first-hand experiences, isn't it, from the people that work there?
Yeah, definitely, because this is where you start to think, okay, it wasn't a horrible place. From what we're hearing of the stories, it wasn't a horrible place. So it becomes very interesting then when you're dealing with life and death, and you know, you're working in medicine, that obviously, yeah, you're also working very long hours and there's a lot of drugs. So there's but not that I don't believe that people see things, but the chances of you seeing things become so much greater in an incredible Victorian building like that as well.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing. It's not only the experience they have or their encounters with life and death, but also what's in between, I suppose, as well, you could say, definitely.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, some of the treatments as well in that era, you're talking about opiates being handed out to people and things like that. And yeah, you would definitely start to see things anyway. But yeah, maybe you see things that are there even more. Who knows? But obviously the nurses weren't drugged up, so they were definitely seeing something. And yeah, even I know that somebody commented they were working there in like the 90s, and they said, yeah, definitely haunted. Lots of people have commented, haven't they? They're like, yeah, definitely haunted. Yeah.
Definitely, yeah. Quite interesting, though.
Yeah. So
there is another comment as well from Matt. Thanks for tuning in, Matt.
Oh, cool.
He said on the 3rd floor, it was quite famous for shadow figures floating around.
Ooh. Yeah.
It's like the 3rd floor, those lucky residents are moving in.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, exactly.
They're in for a treat for sure, I'm sure.
I wonder what ward the 4th floor was then, because of Linda saying about Sheppey Tower was the one of the, where it was very active apparently.
Matt's also just said it'll be quite interesting to find out if a paranormal team have done an investigation.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I haven't seen anything. I mean, the urban explorers are generally, like you were saying, like, oh yeah, if it was haunted, but I've not seen anybody specifically go in. But maybe when it's redeveloped, they will. Or maybe a ghost hunter will move in. Even better.
I mean, for all we know, I think the residents may have something to contribute to this project in the coming months and years. When
actually, you might be right. Yeah, definitely. Yeah,
that'll be quite interesting. Yeah. So I think on the whole, that wraps up today's session. On St. Bart's, its role as a Loch era hospital, as well as that the ghost stories and all the encounters people have had with some mysterious figures. So this St. Bart's project, we're looking at its role as the historic heart of health in Medway for over 900 years, up until it closed back in 2016. So over the course of this week, myself, George from Future Chatham, and Natasha from Creatabot, we've teamed up to share all this historical information and data and encounters that we've all come across relating to the hospital over the course of this week up until Sunday. And also, yes, one of the big things that we want is for you guys to contribute to us, your stories, experiences, and memories. If you stayed, worked, or lived in the hospital, or know someone that has, if it was a family member or a friend. So please do get in touch. Any old photos in particular, we'd love to see them. So as I say, you could enter by post to Intra in the High Street in Rochester, and by email to stbartsproject@gmail.com, and by social media to Future Chatham on Twitter and Facebook, or to Creatabot on both platforms as well. And this project has been micro-commissioned for the High Street Heritage Action Zone cultural programme led by Medway Council, funded by Historic England, and supported by the National Lottery Heritage Fund and Arts Council England. So thank you.
Thank you
for facilitating that for us. So I think, Natasha, tomorrow you'll be leading on getting creative with St. Bart, if I'm not wrong.
Yeah, that's it. I just want to encourage from where we are so far. We've talked about a lot of things which can be really inspiring for creatives. So looking at the medieval history and the ghost stories, I think we've got some stuff to do there. And also there's Ali's Medway poetry walk call out as well. So I can explain a little bit more about that. So yeah, it's interesting actually. I found a poem at the back of the Chatham Scandal book.
Right.
I was like, oh, so that's so it shows you how interesting it is. And I have got yeah, there's lots of different artwork which kind of already exists that's very inspired by obviously Medway as a whole, and that kind of the Loch Ward history and things like that. So yeah, we'll see what comes out of it. It'd be really interesting.
Absolutely, yeah. And on Friday, I think we're both covering the hospital inside. St. Bart's behind the walls, as we like to say, all the walls and everything that went on inside. And on Saturday, I'll be leading a session looking at the future of St. Bart's, because that also is quite a hot topic at the moment. The scaffolding has gone up, so I'll take you guys through basically what's planned, what's going to happen, how's it going to look like, most importantly, and yeah, keep you up to date with that. So thank you from the both of us. I think that draws our session today to a close. Thank you for everyone tuning in. We've had some really positive feedback on Facebook so far, so we hope that you have found this all very useful. And yeah, and get in touch. As I say, get in touch if you've got anything to contribute, any stories, memories, experiences. We're here and we want to hear them.
Yeah, we do. We want to hear them.
Absolutely.
Great. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you very much for that. And we'll see you tomorrow.
Yeah, see you tomorrow.